So, we're back with another Teamup Time, and for today's video, we are going to be discussing Paladin Cecil from Final Fantasy IV. So, in our recent Act 3 Chapter 1 story, Cecil was hinted at carrying a powerful light, which made him a target to the villains of this chapter. I won't spoil who if you haven't finished the chapter yet, but anyway. Turns out the game devs were taking that quite literally as he receives his power spike with his LD and burst arriving in just a few days. So for his kit overview, Cecil is a mixed native holy attacker with support auras. His role in the fight is basically a secondary damage dealer with support utility that has holy laced into his entire kit. So his skill 1 is Saint's Fall, a single target 4 brave HP melee attack which grants Brilliant Sword, and changes his brave attack into Light Slash. His skill 2 is Holy Flame, which is an AoE Holy Brave HP range attack, which grants Divine Shield, and changes his HP attack into Luminous Blast. His EX is Paladin Force, a 4 Brave HP attack delivered twice, so a total of 2 HP damage I believe, yeah. It's fully charged at the start of the quest, and inflicts Holy Resist down and extends his skill 1 and skill 2 buffs by 3 turns, and grants him the Light to Rend the Dark buff. His additional ability is Light Enchant, which is in total 2 uses, and enchants the party with Holy and gives them a 10% attack increase. So now with his LD, his LD is named Luminous Shard. If it's fully maxed, it is an 8-hit ranged holy attack delivered 2 times. The first hit will be 3 hits, and then the second HP dump will be 5 hits. It grants him the overhead buff of Entrusted Crystal. It'll last for 16 turns, which raises the party's defense further by 120%, totaling to 200%, an additional 10% HP regen, and grants the party Overheal, which basically means that you can exceed your own max HP. And in addition to that, while your HP is at 100%, it increases your Brave damage by 50%, HP damage by 20%, and lowers HP damage taken by 20%. And lastly, Luminous Shard gives Cecil a free skill use, which usually ends up being put into his C65. And lastly, his burst is Soul Shift. It is a 15-hit holy AoE attack which deals full damage at the end. Its burst effect is that it further increases the party's total damage, the usual stuff. So like extra 50% I believe. Gives another 10% HP regen, which totals to 30 overall. It increases the Brave by HP by your party's HP amount on their turn. And while your HP is at 100%, it increases your Brave damage dealt and your damage limits. So something I didn't take note of in the last video, which I'm including now, is call notes. So for Paladin Cecil's call, it's his skill 2, which gives the party his 80% defense up for 6 turns, which is a call ability at the bottom, so it doesn't take up a buff slot. His LD does the same thing. It gives the special aura of increasing your party's defense by 120% and the HP limit up by 30. Sadly, you don't get the HP damage and Brave damage up bonuses of his LD because he has to be in the party for that to work. Anyway, for Cecil's strengths, he is arguably one of the most powerful overheads in the game at this time. He has Holy Imperil and can Holy Enchant the party. He makes the party very healthy by allowing the overflow limit and high HP regen of 30%. His overhead conditional is almost too easy to upkeep because of his entire kit overall. So the full effect of the overhead will almost be maintained throughout most fights. He has 3 frame buffs, with some of them having party auras. Not the strongest, but it's something, it's still good. And his HP and Brave variants are actually really good, for considering that he doesn't get a tuning pass here. And a strength and a weakness again, he only has 1 debuff slot. For weaknesses, Cecil has no tuning pass when he gets his LD and burst, so unfortunately he's going to be left with 6 uses for both of his skills. Even with his LD free uses, that's still going to be lacking in some longer fights. But considering that his kit allows for like DPS racing shenanigans, it might be able to balance out. I have to test it first. Next weakness is that he is a natively holy attacker, so you can't bypass the fights by enchanting him with other people. So if you're in a holy absorb fight, he's very limited, but his overhead is too good. So the point is that he can still kind of give something to the party. He has low hit counts on all of his skills except for his EX, LD, and his HP plus, the Luminous Blast. And lastly, his last weakness would be that defense up is not the best defensive buff, even if it is like at 200%. You'll still have to make a team around it if you want to bank on this ability being like utilized in fights. So now we get to the main part of the video, which is basically who pairs well with Cecil exactly. So I want to keep it simpler by not making specific teams anymore. I will just show on the screen that I'm just gonna show on the screen like who I think like fits well with him. So the first set of characters I'd like to talk about are multiple HP damage dealers. So by this I mean they have multiple HP dumps in their skills. So the main reason for this is that every time they HP dump, they get the benefit of the 20% boost that Cecil has on his overhead. Damage dealers also ideally help compensate Cecil's low hits on his skill 1 and skill 2. But I'm just saying that it's optimal to give him like allies that have multiple HP dumps. But any damage dealer will be very, very helpful in keeping Cecil consistent. Next is pairing him with other HP damage up characters. Most if not all HP damage increases in the game are tied to a unique frame buff, debuff, overhead. So there's no problem with like overlap, and they stack well with each other. Some of the HP damage ups are from selfish DPSs. The main idea is that they can stack well with each other and overall like increase damage output. Although there is a point when it just like caps out because you're still tied to your total like cap. So you don't need to bring that many HP damage increase characters to a fight. But the more you can stack in, the better. So the next type I'd like to talk about are healers. Burst healers and regen types are included in this one. So burst healers paired with Cecil will basically assure that he has his overhead's full effect on demand, while regen stacking with Cecil is not a bad strategy either, and easier to upkeep because you don't have to waste a skill but just have to take a turn. Whichever road you choose for the healing route, it'll always be a good idea. It'll always be a good outcome either way. Personally, I'm more inclined to go for the regen types because Cecil already has like burst heals on his own if you want it on demand. Next is damage mitigators. So any form of mitigation plays well into any team, but in Cecil's case in particular, his defense-oriented buffs will actually benefit from the additional damage mitigation. So I'm counting both brave damage reduction, HP damage reduction, you name it. And by extension, I want to broaden the scope of damage mitigation and include attack debuffers in that category, as seeing as how some of our recent bosses have the ability to bypass damage reduction effects. You can go the alternate route and debuff their attack, which actually might play better with Cecil's defense up, since ideally that would mean the ceiling to mitigate their damage significantly will be a bit easier. Anyway, lastly, I want to include defense down debuffers. So in that sense, imperils and defense downs are always a good mix to permanently deal cap damage in the face of brave damage reductions. And since Cecil only occupies like one debuff slot on his kit, it's easy to weave in other like debuffers into the mix, even if they are like selfish debuffers. And lastly is more of a small nitpick, but characters that can frame a holy imperil. It's a small nitpick, but framed imperils are always good for Cecil, so they don't get shoved off so his main generic Holy Imperil doesn't get shoved off. So now I get to a segment that I wanted to include last time but didn't know how to properly explain it. And I'm just going to call it Best Allies. So it's a segment dedicated to characters who work extremely well with the character in question, so Cecil. And the first character I'd like to talk about is Rude, because he has a lot of heal and battery in his kit. He has multiple HP dumps, which will benefit from Cecil's overhead, and the fact that he has the ability to let the party battery when healing means that Cecil's skill 2 and LD will benefit greatly from doing this. They also work in tandem with their mixed defensive utility, and the thing I like about this is that the third member can be a selfish debuffer, and you have a strong team because Rude doesn't occupy any debuff slots at all. Next is Balthier. Okay, the leading man has been compared to Cecil when he debuted like a month ago, and everyone kept playing the comparison game and just putting them on a pedestal separate from each other. But they work well together, and they have almost the exact same overhead buff, and you can stack them with each other. So true, Balthier won't have the optimal benefit from the HP damage up since he only has 1 HP dump on his entire kit. But the fact of the matter is that they work well with each other. They just need a proper third to one maybe to be a bigger damage dealer than Balthier. I'm not sure, but anyway. Point of the matter is they work well together. Next is Gladio, which I think it's cheating at this point how well Gladio fits anywhere on a team. But in particular, Gladio gives a party brave damage reduction, which blends well with Cecil's defense. And the fact that he has multiple HP dumps on his EX and the constant protect and counter means that he'll be dumping a lot of damage throughout the fight, which will benefit because he has Cecil's LD overhead. An honorable mention I'd also want to talk about is Kurosame. Although not as good as Balthier, since he can't be enchanted with Holy, Kurosame gains a lot of off-turn follow-ups after his EX, and his EX itself is a multi-hit HP dump. He works well with Cecil mostly because Kurosame's innate weakness, for me at least, was that he gave the team a lot of offensive capabilities, but he himself was an average damage dealer on his own, which could be fixed with the overhead buff that Cecil gets. And the fact that with the recent content, he isn't as safe anymore with his EX follow-up refunds because of the Brave gain reductions we've received. So now we get to the future potential of this portion of this video, which is for mechanics. Cecil being also another burst character means he is going to receive his burst plus eventually. It's not out on the JP side yet, but he's going to get it. And hopefully he never got a rework in his initial LD and burst reveal. So here's hoping that maybe in the future they'll give him an overall tuning pass. So now for characters that have future potential with Cecil. One that I can think of that's clearly going to work well is Tifa. Because Tifa's rework and LD is basically going to break the games in terms of single target damage for a good while when she arrives. And considering that her entire kit by that point will be laced with multiple HP dumps, it's going to be very effective to pair Cecil with her. Next is Tidus, the future god of follow-ups when he receives his LD and burst. Will definitely play well off of Cecil's HP damage up. Although from what I understood, by that point in the game, we have a lot of other options for HP damage up outside of Cecil, so yeah, you can play around with who to pair with, which doesn't help the next character I'm about to talk about, which is also Garland. But in Garland's defense, he's overall going to be good anyway when he arrives with his burst and LD extensions. Despite being good in general, he's going to get even better by being further empowered by Cecil, because he has too many HP dumps to not be paired with him properly. And next is Thematically, another character that could go well in the future with Cecil is Golbez when he gets his burst, Eldian burst. They actually work really well together because Golbez has HP dumps laced throughout his entire kit. And once you get past the whole like they can't imperil enchant one another, it's kind of, yeah, that's pretty much my main nitpick about that pairing. But I like it because brothers, yes. Next is Vaughn. Yeah, all I wrote here was Jesus, his rework. Yeah, I think that's enough said. And lastly, one of the more recent ones on the JP side was Barret. Barret seems like a fun option to try because he has a lot of multiple HP dumps in his kit, even right now. It's just that he is really underpowered until he gets his LD, which basically like skyrockets him. Okay, and lastly, that's pretty much it. I mean, I don't know, Cecil's been hyped on Global for a reason. Because, okay, I'm going to keep this simple. Does the enemy counter holy damage in any way at all? If not, Cecil will put in work. Like, period. You just need to like watch out for what the orb is, but once you get past that, you can pair Cecil as long as he's not absorbed. And sometimes even when he is, because his overhead buff is just that good. So my advice for this banner, and this character in general, at least have his LD. His burst makes Transcendence way easier, but his LD is still the main thing you'd want for him. Okay, that's pretty much it. So thanks for watching. Leave a like, comment any suggestions, teams you might have thought of, subscribe if you enjoy this kind of content, and yeah, that's pretty much it. So yeah, let's get the hype train going for Paladin Cecil. He is honestly one of my favorites from the series, so I would have pulled for him regardless of how broken he is. And I'll see you guys later. Bye bye!